Hi everyone, Christina here. Welcome to another card video at my YouTube channel and blog. Today I'm going to be creating a card using two stamp sets from W+9's latest release. I'm going to be using a large floral stamp with some embossing, and then I'll do a bit of ink blending and then bring in those word stamps as well. I'm starting out with some W+9 cashmere cardstock. It's a very pale, kind of peachy pink color. It's a hard color to describe, but I did want to show you the difference between regular white cardstock and the cashmere cardstock. So that's what I just did there. And now I'm going to do some embossing on top of the cashmere cardstock. Just for reference, this cardstock is cut to be slightly smaller than an A2 sized card. It is 4 inches wide by 5 1/4 tall. And I'm going to be stamping the floral stamp in Versamark ink 2 or 3 different times on this cardstock. I want to keep the top right corner free of any imagery because I want to have a little bit of a diagonal line of movement going from the top left corner to the bottom right corner. So as I do all this stamping, you'll notice that I'm going to leave that top right corner pretty free from any stamping. I'm using some Hero Arts white embossing powder and sprinkling that on top of the stamping and then shaking off the excess. I'll then use my heat tool to heat set this until it's completely smooth and melted. Just a tip for using heat embossing on your cardstock, especially when it's a large area like this. You want to make sure that your heat tool heats up for a considerably long amount of time until it's as hot as it's ever going to be. And that means it's only going to be applied to your cardstock for a minimal amount of time. So I've cut a piece of Neenah Solo Write cardstock to be a little bit more of a narrower strip, and I'm going to do some ink blending. So my previous 2 videos for this week were both on ink blending, and I thought, you know what, this is sort of turning into a little bit of a mini series. Let's go ahead and just finish this week off with another ink blended card. So I'm using 3 different colors from Simon Says Stamp right now, and I'll bring in a 4th in a minute. This first color is a very, very soft, kind of warm pink. It goes really well with that cashmere cardstock. This color is called Pale Blush Pink. And then I'm going to go ahead and switch that to Coral Reef. And then eventually I'll start blending in some Hot Mama. I love these color names, they're so fun. So I wanted to give you some additional tips on ink blending, especially when it comes to using inks that are not distress inks. I think ink blending really got a lot of attention when people realized that it was particularly less difficult to ink blend with distress inks. I think that's because distress inks, they take a little bit more time to dry, so you have a little bit more time to really kind of mix them onto your cardstock. Other types of ink tend to soak into the cardstock a little bit more quickly, so they're hard to get a really good blend. The thing that's interesting about Simon Says Stamp ink, as well as W+9 and Lawn Fawn and Hero Art Shadow inks, they all have a very similar formula where the ink kind of soaks into the paper gradually and then dries into the paper and evens out over time. So I think with these particular inks, they lend themselves to ink blending because even though you're blending them onto the cardstock and they might look a little bit splotchy at first, as they soak into the cardstock, they really even out and give you a very soft blended look. I think that's why I really love to blend with these as well. I had never really thought about blending with Simon inks until I saw Laura Basson doing it, and I just thought it was gorgeous, and I'm like, wow, how is she getting this to work? Because I've tried ink blending with other types of ink in the past and didn't have great success. So when I saw her using the Simon Says Stamp inks, I was like, oh, ding, 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 this is awesome. So at this point in all of my ink blending, I realized that those 3 colors just weren't cutting it. I wanted to bring in a little bit more of an intense color at the very bottom of this panel. So I added in the color Blue Violet, and I'm only going to bring that into the very bottom portion of this blended piece of cardstock. The other thing I wanted to mention is that you may have noticed that when I blended on that Coral Reef color, I brought it down almost to the very bottom of that panel, even though it was really only going to take up about the first half. That's because if you want a really nice, smooth blend, go ahead and blend those colors out even farther than you think you're going to need them, because then as you add more color on top, it'll get a nice transition of color. So I let that piece of paper dry for a couple hours. I don't think I needed to let it dry that quickly or that long, but I just happened to be doing other things. So it did dry for a couple hours and it evened out a little bit even more. And now I'm going to bring in these word stamps from that other stamp set. I've spaced them out using my grid mat here. This is an 11 by 17, or I think it's 12 by 18 grid mat from Dolly. I think that's how you say it, or maybe Dali. I'm not sure how to pronounce. But all of these supplies I'm using today will be linked down in the video description with links directly to online stores. So I used an anti-static powder tool across that panel there to make sure that as I add embossing powder that it won't stick to areas where I haven't stamped. I just did a test run with that by sprinkling on some white embossing powder. And then I stamped all of those words in Versamark ink onto this panel. You'll be able to see them a little bit as I pull this away here. And I'm going to be coating them in that same white embossing powder that I used for the cashmere cardstock floral stamping. So sprinkling that on, making sure I get a nice even coating of all of that embossing powder. And then I'll go ahead and shake off the excess and then bring my heat tool over to heat set this. And like I said before, a way to help with warping is to make sure your heat tool is sufficiently heated up before you bring it to your cardstock. I put some foam adhesive on the back of this panel and then press that down onto the cashmere cardstock piece. I'm going to prep my card base by using some Neenah Solar White 110-pound cardstock. I'm scoring it at 5.5 inches to create a top folding card. I then put some Tombow Extreme adhesive on the back of the cashmere cardstock piece and then press that down onto my card base here. The last thing I did was I wanted to add a little bit of detail around that ink blended panel, and so I used a white gel pen to add dashed lines just around the edges. This card is rather simple looking, and I think it needed that additional small detail just to make it feel a little bit more finished. So that's the card for today. Hope you guys enjoyed. If you would love to see more ink blending cards like this in the future, let me know down in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. And if you have other color combinations you'd love to see ink blended, I'd love to hear those as well. Thanks for watching, and I will see you guys on Monday.